Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. My name is Cordamt, and in this video I will be going into some detail on the choices I'm making for my character creation. So this is a character that I am taking in my full playthrough of Pathfinder Kingmaker that I am now uploading to the channel. In the first episode of said playthrough, I briefly went over the character creation, but I didn't go into a lot of detail over my choices. As you know, that can take a little bit of time. So this video will be exactly for that. I'm going to explain why I'm choosing what I'm choosing, stuff like why am I going human instead of an elf, why am I putting points in charisma and not in intelligence, for instance, why am I picking the classes I'm picking. Everything that I'm choosing I will explain in more detail here. It's especially relevant for newer players because, you know, if you start up this game and you've never played before, it's very easy to get very overwhelmed when you start looking over all the choices you are making. I remember when I first played the game, I spent like 2 days, 2 days not playing the game, just looking at the character screen. And in the end, I made an absolute horror of a character. So yeah, I think it's useful to try and understand how things work in order to properly build a character. So, I'm actually going to start by looking at the class selection, and then I'm going to go back to the race. And what I'm doing for my character in my playthrough is going to be a spellcaster that is able to deal a lot of damage while also having, you know, utility and some crowd control. But it's mainly going to be a damage dealer that is also able to use sneak attacks. The way you do that is by using this class right here, which is called Arcane Trickster. So the main purpose of my character is going to be an Arcane Trickster. An Arcane Trickster, we can read the description, is an arcane caster, and with their mastery of magic, Arcane Tricksters can make for even more subtle and confounding opponents than standard rogues. Range Legerdmain enhances their skill as thieves, and their ability to make sneak attacks without flanking or as part of a spell can make Arcane Tricksters formidable damage dealers. So pretty cool little description. I think the main aspect of the Arcane Trickster is that you are able to stack sneak attack damage on top of your spells, which is something that no other class can do. So I think it's a fun class, it's a really cool class, I like it. I like sorcerers, I like magic, and this is different enough that makes me want to do it. We can actually start by talking about this. If you'll notice, Arcane Trickster is grayed out, you cannot choose it at level 1, as well as all of these over here. And this is because these are, I believe they're called prestige classes. Now, the base classes are all these between Alchemist and Wizard, which you can pick at level 1. And they don't have any prerequisites, but the Arcane Trickster does have prerequisites. So we can look at it over here. You need to have a trickery skill score of at least 4, mobility skill score of at least 4. You need to have sneak attack 2. This is not a skill, this is a combat ability, let's say. I will explain that a little bit better in a second. You need to be able to cast arcane spells of 2nd level or higher. And you also need to have a skill score of Knowledge Arcana 4. So the skills I will explain a little bit, and any class can get skills in any way they want, so that's easy enough to do. But in order to get sneak attacks, you actually need to have levels in a class that provides sneak attacks. And in order to get arcane spells, you need to have levels in a class that gives you arcane spells. Okay? So when I say you need to have levels in a class, what I mean to say is that even though at the start of the game you choose to be a sorcerer, this doesn't mean that on every single level up you need to put points in sorcerer. You don't need to continue leveling up your sorcerer. You can choose to be a sorcerer at level 1 And when you level up through experience, right, in combat or checks or quests or whatever, you can put another level in, for example, Ranger, if you want, or Monk, or Magus, or whatever. So this is called multi-classing, and I guess we could call multi-classing an advanced topic, let's say. But given that my character requires multi-classing, I feel like I need to explain it. So you can, as you go through the game, you can take a character and keep it pure. You could, for example, put 20 points in Sorcerer and you would have an amazing Sorcerer. Or you could, put some points in Sorcerer, some points in some other classes for whatever reason you may need. Some classes benefit from staying pure. For example, a Cleric, I think, benefits from it, while other classes can actually benefit a lot from multi-classing. And in certain cases, it's not even a question of benefit or not, it's a question of a prerequisite, okay? So like I was saying, in order to get sneak attack and to get arcane spells, you need classes that give you this. And there is no class that gives you both arcane spells and sneak attack. That doesn't exist. So we will need to multi-class. And I'm gonna start by talking about the sneak attack portion of the character build. Sneak attack you can get by putting points, for example, in a Slayer. And this is the sneak attack symbol over here. Rogue, which is your more traditional sneaky character. Okay, it's the one that comes up if you think about sneak attacks. And then the other choice you have is in the Alchemist subclass of the Vivisectionist. So Vivisectionist is an alchemist that also gets points in sneak attack. This will be the one I'll be choosing, but I will come back to it in a second. So just to explain how this works. Sneak attack. If a character can catch an opponent when he is unable to defend himself effectively from her attack, she can strike a vital spot for extra damage. I'm not going to be going into denials of dexterity bonuses and being flat-footed and whatnot, but just know that if you are able to exploit the defenses of an opponent, you qualify for sneak attack damage. What sneak attack does is, if you qualify for sneak attack and you hit, you will deal an additional 1d6 points of damage for every point of sneak attack you have. Okay, so for example, if you have a single level in Rogue, this means if you deal a sneak attack, you will deal the weapon, you will deal the damage from your weapon, plus 1d6 damage from the sneak attack. A side note, in case you are not familiar with what I'm talking about, d6 and d8s and whatnot, when I say 1d6, what I mean is you roll a 6-sided die and the result you get is the damage you deal. Okay, so if you roll a 6-sided die and it rolls a 4, that means you deal 4 damage. So 1d6, you deal between 1 and 6 damage. If you had more points in sneak attack, let's say you had 3 points in sneak attack by being a level 5 rogue, this means you would deal an extra 3d6 damage from your sneak attack, which would mean rolling 3 6-sided dice and adding up the result. So in this case it would go between 3 and 18 damage. So one of the ways you can qualify for having sneak attack as the prerequisite for the Arcane Trickster would be, for example, by putting 3 points or 3 levels in the Rogue class, because you would get 1 sneak attack over here and then no sneak attack at level 2, but then you would get another point in sneak attack at level 3. This would mean you have sneak attack 2, which means you would qualify for this prerequisite of the Arcane Trickster. The other way you can get sneak attack, besides, going for other classes, is through feats. I will explain the feats part in a second, but just know that in order to get started in sneak attack, you really need to have a level in a class that gives it to you. Otherwise, you will not be able to get sneak attack. So, why did I choose a vivisectionist instead of a rogue? If we look at what a rogue does, or what a rogue gives you, a rogue will give you some proficiencies, in this case all simple weapons, plus the hand crossbow, rapier, sap, short sword and short bow. They are proficient with light armor but not with shields. If we look at this, it doesn't really matter for what I'm going for, because my character is going to be a spellcaster. I'm not going to be concerned about hitting someone with a rapier or a short sword. I don't want to be in melee. In terms of ranged weapons, hand crossbows don't even exist in the game, which is kind of silly. And I don't need a short bow. If I'm ever shooting something, I can just use a crossbow. It doesn't matter to me. So this doesn't give me anything. Weapon finesse. With a light weapon, elven curved blade, estoc or rapier made for a creature of your size, you may use your dexterity modifier instead of your strength on attack rolls. This is only relevant for melee combat. Again, my character will be in the back line tossing spells. I don't want them in the front line, so this is also irrelevant for me. And in terms of trap finding, you add half your level on perception checks. Sure, it's semi-useful, but nothing really amazing. And then you get sneak attack, which you need. Okay, so this is what you would get by getting 1 point or 1 level in rogue. If we compare it with the vivisectionist, we have throw anything, which gives us a +1 bonus on attack rolls with thrown splash weapons. So basically, if you toss like a grenade or a fire flask or an acid flask, you get a +1 to attack. It's not going to be very relevant for our character. You get alchemist proficiencies, so all simple weapons and bombs. So bombs we won't use, simple weapons the same thing as a rogue, so we're fine. And we are proficient with light armor but not with shields, same thing as a rogue. Also doesn't matter because spellcasters don't really want to use armor. It hinders their spellcasting ability. We also have sneak attack, which is what we need. And then we have a mutagen. So this is the real reason why I'm picking the vivisectionist instead of the rogue. The mutagen is basically an ability that you have where you drink a potion or you drink a mutagen that will give you benefits to your stats. In this case, it will give you a +4 bonus to one of your ability scores, strength, dexterity or constitution, and for the moment just know that dexterity will be important to us. So we can get a +4 bonus to dexterity by using the mutagen, and this bonus stacks with everything, and we can talk about stacking in a second, but just know that a lot of different bonuses, a lot of bonuses don't stack with each other, but the mutagen stacks with everything, so it's really, really good. And you also get a +2 to your armor class. So you get a +2 to natural armor bonus, which also stacks with everything. So it's good defensively and offensively. And it's essentially free, because you need some class that gives you sneak attack, this one gives it to you, and you get the mutagen as a bonus for free. So, in my opinion, it's clearly the superior choice for our purposes here. Since we won't be advancing in either of these classes, so we won't be advancing in Alchemist, or we also wouldn't be advancing in Rogue, it doesn't matter any of these things over here, because we would never reach them, so we don't have to take them into consideration. The same thing for the Rogue, okay? So this part doesn't matter. So on level 1, Vivisectionist wins. Whoops. So that would take care of our sneak attack prerequisite. Like I said, the skills, any class can put points however they like, so it doesn't matter. And now, for the ability to cast arcane spells of 2nd level or higher, we have several choices. So, we would need to pick a class that counts as an arcane caster. So it's a magic wielder, someone that can cast arcane spells. You can also think as a spellcaster class, a cleric or a druid, for example, but those are using divine spells they get from their gods. It's different and they do not qualify. Divine magic is not the same thing as arcane magic. So, for the prerequisite of arcane spells, we could go for a wizard, we could go for a sorcerer, we could go for a magus, and I'm looking at over here where it says arcane caster, or we could go for a bard. Any of these would allow us to get arcane spells of level 2 or higher to qualify for that prerequisite. The reason why I'm going for a sorcerer is because I prefer the way that spells work on a sorcerer compared to a wizard, for example. And just to give a brief comparison between the two, a wizard, I believe, is more flexible than a sorcerer because you can get spells by leveling up, and you can get spells by scribing scrolls that you pick up throughout your travels. And this means you can basically get in your... You can basically learn every single arcane spell that the game has, while the sorcerer can only have a small subset. The main difference here is that the wizard, even though he learns like, I don't know, 10 spells at level 1, for example, every time he rests, he has to prepare his spells and select which spells he wants to take on his next adventure. And you can say something like, I want 1 fireball and 1 arcane missile and 1 stinking cloud, for example. And what this means is when you're, adventuring, if you cast a fireball, you spent your memorized fireball. You cannot cast fireball again. A sorcerer doesn't work that way. Every single spell that the sorcerer learns, he can cast freely, and he does not have to prepare them, up to the amount of spells per level he can cast per day. Okay, that's something more gameplay related, but just know this: wizards are much more flexible, and I think would be my suggestion for anyone wanting to try out the game for the first time, because you get to pick and choose and try, experiment with all spells, while with the sorcerer you have to select them when you level up, and if you make a mistake you can't really unlearn it and learn a different one. It's done. So yeah, the wizard is more new player friendly. However, given that the sorcerer is less flexible, he's more specialized, he's also better at those particular spells in the way that he doesn't have to prepare them, he can cast them freely, so I think it's more powerful in that specific set of spells that you choose. So it's kind of a personal preference, and I enjoy sorcerers more for that reason. The other very powerful reason as well is that by picking a sorcerer, and I will also explain in a second why I'm not picking any of these 3 other sorcerers, is that the sorcerer also gets to pick a bloodline. And the bloodline is essentially, or lore-wise, is what gives the sorcerer his powers. So you can have an abyssal bloodline, like power from demons, a celestial bloodline, arcane bloodline, draconic bloodlines, power from dragons, and you have different colors, from the elements, from fae, undead even, okay? So these are all very cool, lore-wise, but the gameplay reason is that a bloodline, especially a draconic bloodline, will give you this thing right here, which is Draconic Bloodline Arcana, and then you have 1 for each color. And what this does is, whenever you cast a spell with fire damage, in the case for red, that spell deals 1 point of damage, or deals 1 extra point of damage per die rolled. So if we think back at the example I gave a few minutes ago about sneak attack, where you had those 3d6 dice, this means that when you rolled those 3 dice, you would add up the results of the damage from those dice, but then you would also add 3 extra damage because you rolled 3 dice. And you know, this scales up as far as it goes. If you have, let's say, a fireball that deals 6d6, it would deal 66 plus 6. So it's just a way to make all of your spells of this particular element that much more powerful? Not sure if that's correct English, but it makes them much more powerful in this way. And every little bit of damage will help. Pathfinder, like I said in the first episode, is a game about stacking numbers. You want to stack numbers as high as possible to overcome your enemies. Be it to have a chance to hit them, or by dealing as much damage as possible, or overcoming their saving throws to affect them with spells. You want to stack up your dice as much as possible. So yeah, this will be a very nice bonus for what we're doing. And as I said before, the purpose of the Arcane Trickster is to be mainly a very heavy damage dealer. So this is just more damage, which is great. In terms of looking at the... I guess I can also compare it with these, by the way. I mentioned the Magus and I also mentioned the Bard. The reason why I don't consider either of these is that while a Wizard or a Sorcerer gets spells up to level 9 spells, I think you can even see it, like if I do a right click here, you can see that on level 20 they get access to 6 level 9 spells. And the Wizard, the same thing, but only 4. So this goes back to what I was saying, the Sorcerer has more spells per level. If we look at the Magus, he only has spells up to level 6. He doesn't have any more. And the Bard, same thing. It only goes up to level 6. And the class you choose to be your Arcane Caster class will influence what the Arcane Trickster then uses. So if you were to use a Bard, you wouldn't get access to the higher level spells. If you were to choose a Sorcerer or a Wizard, you would get access to higher level spells. So that's another reason to pick between these two. So, from the Sorcerer, the reason why I'm choosing the basic Sorcerer instead of any of these is the following. The Imperial Sorcerer, and let's pay attention to this bar over here where you can see this bloodline. The Sorcerer gets a bloodline. The Imperial Sorcerer already has a bloodline selected, which is the Imperial bloodline. So in this case, you get some bonuses, but you don't get that extra damage per dice rolled. The Sylvan Sorcerer, the same thing. You get an Animal Companion, which is extremely powerful, but not for the purposes of what I'm building here, but you don't get extra damage per dice rolled. The Sage Sorcerer, the same thing. You have an Arcane bloodline, you have some cool stuff, you get to use your primary stat as Intelligence instead of Charisma, but you also don't get the plus damage to dice rolled. So the Sorcerer is better in this sense for damage purposes, for my purpose, and I also like the fact that it uses Charisma as its primary casting stat. So let me just simulate here. I will do something like this, and I'm gonna pick the red bloodline because the more powerful spells for what I will be doing with my character are going to be fire based. And if all goes well, I can also get an item that allows me to convert damage into fire. So, looking at the ability score, this is what I chose in the character I used for my playthrough. So this is 7 Strength, 16 Dex, 14 Constitution, 11 Intelligence, 10 Wisdom, and 19 Charisma. Let's just give a brief overview over here of what these do. Strength is going to be the primary stat you use to to determine if you hit with your attacks in melee, especially with heavy weapons. And it will also determine by default the amount of damage you deal with melee weapons. Dexterity will be the stat that determines your chance to hit and the damage you deal with ranged weapons. I'm actually not sure if it affects damage. No, but yeah, it does. So it will determine your chance to hit and the damage you deal with ranged weapons, and also especially light weapons, stuff like daggers and kukris and rapiers and whatnot. If your build also supports it with weapon finesse, I won't go into that right now. It determines bonuses to your armor class, so the more dexterity you have, the less likely you are to be hit if you are not using heavy armor. And it also improves your reflex saving throws. I forgot to say, strength also improves your... it doesn't. Constitution does, sorry. So dexterity also influences your reflex. Strength does not influence your fortitude. Constitution does. But yeah, so 16 over here. Going to Constitution, this will determine your hit points. The more Constitution you have, the more hit points you have, and the more fortitude saving throw you have as well. So it will allow you to resist certain effects. Intelligence is the primary casting stat for various classes, like for example a wizard or the sage sorcerer. It will also influence how many skill points you get to assign per level. So these are just skills that you use throughout the game. They don't really affect combat in any way, with certain exceptions like mobility, and I guess you could consider use magic device, but these are mostly to interact with the game world, to make checks to see if you pass them, and if you do pass them you get, bonuses and experience. If you fail them you get some kind of penalty or nothing happens. But intelligence influences how many points you can attribute per level. Wisdom is the primary casting stat for divine casters, so clerics, druids, inquisitors, and it will also influence your will saving throw. And finally, charisma is your primary casting stat for example, a bard, a paladin, or a sorcerer. It also affects clerics in certain ways, and something very important, it affects your persuasion skill. So every single one of these, if you notice, it will darken certain sections here. So strength affects athletics, dexterity affects mobility, trickery, and stealth, constitution affects nothing, intelligence affects the knowledge skills, wisdom affects lore, nature, religion, and perception, and charisma affects persuasion and use magic device. So the other reason why I love, or the reason why I love having charisma as my primary stat, is that since it affects persuasion, it's beneficial twofold. First of which, given that this is my main character, I like the idea that my character is the party face. He's the person talking to the NPCs. So I like that particular character to have high charisma and high persuasion to perform better in those situations. It makes sense to me. And the other reason, which is more metagaming reason and more gameplay reason, is that there are a lot of persuasion checks throughout the game in dialogues. And one thing they did in Pathfinder Kingmaker, and I don't really understand why, but they did, is that skill checks are actually one of, if not the best way to gain experience. So often you will get a lot more experience by passing a single skill check than by killing 40 enemies. It may seem strange, but that's exactly how it works. So by having someone with very, very high persuasion, especially your main character, it makes sense, role-playing wise, and it will also allow you to get a lot of benefits, a lot of additional experience that you would not otherwise get with a character that doesn't have a lot of charisma or doesn't have a lot of persuasion. So everything just works very, very well in this entire build, in my opinion, because I like the Sorcerer for spellcasting reasons. It works as a prerequisite for the Arcane Trickster. It gives me the bloodline, it's charisma base, so it's going to affect my persuasion as well as my role-playing value. So this is the reason why I have made these choices, okay? So, I've mentioned several times that charisma is my primary casting stat. What does this mean? This means that you need a high score on your primary casting stat in order to even be able to cast your spells. And the more of your casting stat you have, the more spell slots you will be able to have as well. Not only that, but it will also influence the difficulty class of your spells. Difficulty class just means how likely it is that an enemy will resist one of the spells you cast. As a very simple example here, you cast a spell like Sleep. When you cast Sleep, it doesn't mean that that the enemy will fall asleep 100% of the time. What actually happens is you cast Sleep on an enemy, the game will roll dice to see if the enemy's will saving throw, his will score, allows him to resist your sleep spell. If it does, he does not fall asleep. If he fails, he falls asleep. The higher your difficulty class of the spell, the more likely it is that you overcome the enemy defenses. So, for a caster, increasing your casting stat as high as possible is definitely desirable. That's why I have charisma at 19 over here, and that's why I have my racial bonus, which I will explain how I got it in a second, set to charisma as well. Because by default, the highest amount you can get is 18, unless you have something like racial bonuses. Okay? So, after charisma, well, and it also affects your persuasion score, like I said. We can even see here, persuasion, we get a +4 from charisma, and we get +3 from our class skill, because sorcerers also have persuasion as a main skill. Our next very important ability is Dexterity. Dexterity, you may usually think of Dexterity as something that you would love to have on a ranger or a rogue, and it makes sense. That's one of the main reasons. But in Pathfinder, it's also very important for spellcasters. Or I should say for specific spellcasters. As a quick example or a comparison, if you are aware of Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, or if you've played Baldur's Gate 3 recently, since it came out and it was a big success, you will know that if you have a spellcaster, your main ability to improve is going to be your main casting stat, so for example, charisma. And if you cast your spells, the only thing that matters to you is your charisma score. You don't care about any of this. However, so if you cast a spell that needs to hit an enemy in the 5th edition of Dungeons & Dragons, Baldur's Gate 3 for example, you would use your charisma score to determine if you hit or not. In Pathfinder, spells that need to have an attack roll, and usually these are like ranged touch attack spells, like for example tossing a firebolt onto an enemy, charisma will not determine if you hit or not. Dexterity will. Anything that has an attack roll associated will be determined by either strength or dexterity. If it's melee, it's going to be strength. If it's ranged, it's going to be dexterity. So, for throwing spells that have range attack rolls, you need to have high dexterity in order to overcome the enemy's AC, the enemy's armor class. That's why we also have a high dexterity score. That's really the main reason. Other than that, I put some points into Constitution because we're going to be playing Last Azlanti, and the more Constitution you have, the more hit points you have, the less likely you are to die. So I don't want to die in a hardcore run. That's why I pump my Constitution score a little bit more. If you wanted more combat prowess, you could do something like, I don't know, lower Constitution and lower Intelligence or Wisdom, for example, and go 18 Dexterity and 19 Charisma. Between 16 and 18 Dexterity, we're talking about a bonus of +1 to hit. As I've said before, every single point is relevant, but I'm not sure if it's going to be relevant enough to justify getting a penalty in either Wisdom or Intelligence and a penalty to my hit points. So I like the spread I have. That's also the same reason why I'm not going for Charisma 20. Also because when you level up, you get to put extra points in your ability scores. I think like every 5 levels. So by having this at 19, I have 4 extra points to use, which I can put like in my Wisdom score. So instead of having a will saving throw of +0, I can have it at +2, and it just costs me 1 point over here. So this to me is my preferred spread for the character that I'm doing. So this is why we have these scores. Strength 7, it doesn't matter because I'm not going to be in melee. I'm not going to be attacking in melee, so I don't care about my strength. Intelligence, I don't need a lot of skill points. I'm mostly going to be putting skill points into the prerequisites of Arcane Trickster, and then I'm only going to be focusing mostly on Persuasion, so I don't need a lot of them per level, so it doesn't matter having a lot more intelligence score. Wisdom, it doesn't affect my spells in any given way. It only affects my will, so it also doesn't matter very much. I'm just keeping them at essentially 10. 10 or 11 is the same thing. It only matters if you get two more or 2 less than 10. So you can see this as being like this. Since it don't affect me very much, I just keep them at 10 to, you know, keep my will score not terrible and also be able to have some skill points to attribute, because otherwise, like if I dump int, I have 1 less. It's just a matter of flexibility. So I'll get like this. This is why I've chosen these ability scores over anything else. Now, we see this racial bonus over here, and this goes back to the race choice. So my preferred choices for races in any classic RPG is always going to be one of the small races. I like shorty people. I like dwarves. I love gnomes. I like halflings. These are my preferred races every single time. The reason why I'm not picking any of these is because human gives me something that's very important. Human gives me a +2 to 1 ability score of my choice. That's why when coming over here, I can choose what I want. In this case, I want the bonus to charisma. And also very important, it gives me an additional feat. So feats are essentially abilities or skills that you have in combat that are useful for combat. At the start of the game, in the early game of Pathfinder, you don't really have a lot to boost your characters. So anything that can help get you started is going to be incredibly beneficial. And getting an extra feat is very, very relevant for my character. Human is the only one that gets the additional feat. It also gets the bonus of having +2 to ability score, so that's awesome as well. And then you also get skilled, which means you get an additional skill rank at first level and 1 additional rank whenever they gain a level. This just gives me, again, added flexibility to put some points in here. Not that relevant, the main reasons really are the extra feat and the bonus to ability score. So, going to what I had. Mobility, trickery. I guess I can just ignore one of these for now. But like this is what I chose: trickery, arcana, and persuasion for starting. And now we can choose the feats. So when I was talking about being able to get sneak attack via feats, this means if I went, for example, for the Vivisectionist, which is what I chose, I got my sneak attack here. Let's just simulate this. We have here, we have accomplished sneak attacker. This is a feat that you can choose. It has the prerequisite of sneak attack 1. That's why I said that if you want to start having sneak attacks, you really need to have a class give it to you. You can't just pick a feat for it, because even this feat has this prerequisite. What this feat will give you is an additional point of sneak attack. What this means is that by having a single level of Vivisectionist, I get sneak attack and the ability to pick up the accomplished sneak attacker feat, which then would give me sneak attack 2, which, going back over here again, is my prerequisite for the Arcane Trickster. Okay? You don't have to start with it, of course, but I'm just showing the feat and how you can get it. And then what I'm starting with as well is I'm going to start with point blank shot and precise shot. What these do is you get a +1 bonus on attack and damage rolls with ranged weapons at ranges of up to 30 feet. Like I said, my character is going to be a backline character. He's going to be casting spells from afar. So any spell that needs an attack roll will benefit from this. And precise shot, you can now shoot or throw ranged weapons at an opponent engaged in melee without taking the standard -4 penalty on your attack roll. What this means is, if you try to shoot somebody with a bow or a ranged touch attack spell, which we're going to be using a lot, if you are casting that at someone that is fighting, like for example your front line, you would get a penalty of 4 to your attack roll, which is massive. So by getting these two, we are going to be increasing our chance to hit and also negating that penalty. Also keep in mind that precise shot has the prerequisite of the point blank shot. By picking a human, it means that right from level 1, you can start shooting people without getting that penalty. Okay? Because, for example, Lindsay and Tartuccio in the tutorial, every time they shoot, they are essentially shooting with the penalty of 4, where my character does not have it. So this is what I'm talking about, getting very nice boosts to kickstart your character right from the start. It's very powerful. In terms of spells, like I said, our main spell book is going to be based on the Sorcerer, not the Alchemist. So over here, the only choice that really matters is True Strike, because it doesn't matter if you only have 1 level of spells in Alchemist or 20, it's always going to do the same thing. And then just pick whatever. Like Cure Light Wounds can be useful because it heals, it doesn't need anything else. But for example, Reduce Person, which will usually be useful in a character such as mine, since you are only going to get 1 single point in Alchemist, the Alchemist caster level will be 1. And this spell lasts for 1 minute per level. So if you are casting it from the Alchemist spellbook, it would only last a single minute, which doesn't really do anything. Then I just choose whatever over here. Lawful Good is mostly for role-playing reasons, as well as the kingdom management. And here we can look at the, the summary. So I hope I was able to explain the character creation. Like I said, the game is very complex. There are a lot of things to take into consideration. It's possible I have forgotten to mention one thing or another. I think I covered everything. But yeah, we can also see over here that by having our strength score, you know, in the negatives, well, I would consider anything below 10 to be negative, quote unquote. You have a penalty of 2. We can see here that our melee attacks have a penalty of 2. So if I was to hit somebody with a club, I would roll a d20, a 20-sided die, and to the result I would subtract 2, which is awful. But we get our range attacks having a bonus of 3 because of our dexterity bonus. And then you can see basically everything. Our AC, same thing, our armor class is 13 because we have a base value of 10 plus dexterity. And you can also just right click on most of these things and it will show you why you have the scores you have. Our fortitude is buffed by constitution, reflex by dexterity, will doesn't get any bonus because we have +0. And here we have like our abilities. We have our mutagens, which are always going to be useful. They last for 10 minutes per level, so even though you only have a single point of Vivisectionist, the mutagen will last 10 minutes, which is, you know, enough for doing a lot of stuff. We have our sneak attack as a prerequisite. We have point blank shot and precise shot being very, very useful for the early game. And we are on our way to continue with our character. And basically the idea here is to put the first point in Vivisectionist because it has more combat prowess than the Sorcerer, so it helps out more in the early game to start the Vivisectionist. And after level 1, we're basically gonna be starting to put points in Sorcerer up until the point where we complete our prerequisites, and once these are fulfilled, we are going to be placing points in Arcane Trickster up to the maximum. In this case, this prestige class only goes up to level 10. You can see right here, this is the maximum level you can get in Arcane Trickster. And after reaching level 10, we will once again continue to put points in Sorcerer to continue the spell progression of the Sorcerer. So my expectation from memory would be Vivisectionist level 1, then it would be Sorcerer until level 5. Let me just check something here, because a Sorcerer on level 4 gets access to level 2 spells. Yep, so level 3 you don't have level 2 spells, but on level 4 you do. Okay. You would go to level 5, and on level 5... Yeah, so 1 Vivisectionist, 4 Sorcerer, and then on the 6th level you would start putting points into Arcane Trickster, so 10 points here, up to 16, and then you would have Sorcerer, 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 Sorcerer. That's at least my prediction for this particular build. Like I said, it's possible that I may have forgotten to explain something here. There's a lot of stuff to cover. If there was something that I wasn't clear about and you want to understand better or you want to know more, leave a comment and I'll try to help out in the best of my abilities. And, you know, as usual, if you have any other question regarding the build, regarding Pathfinder, anything at all, leave a comment. If you enjoy the content, consider subscribing for more. Like I said, there will be a lot more videos coming out very, very soon for Pathfinder, and you will be able to see this character in action in my full playthrough, which will be last Azlanti playthrough, where we will be playing, starting in challenging, moving up to hard, and then going to unfair and playing the majority of the game in the unfair difficulty. That's all, my friends. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope to see you all in the next episode. Until then, stay safe, everyone.